So I do have some other things that I need to work on. That's the whole intro of every study that just kind of develops for the day. And so this topic just developed in my mind today. And interesting because I had this sense that there was some reason as to some things developing and something in the works. And anyway, there's more to the story, but usually what I do, so I've been saying how I'm getting to the topic of the subject within Christian theology and even of question among associations with Christian, Islamic, and Jewish negotiations in terms of the scripture. Differences of opinion and interpretation. Anyway, so the atonement, the idea of the atonement. And so I'm getting there, but just like a lot of studies, especially when they're just such a massive theme or topic, there tends to be these stages where I'm intending to get there and there's all these roundabout subjects that surface. And so just the way that I function is I try to be responsive to whatever those topics are, because usually it's part of the development that I'm not yet ready to quite introduce the next stage. And so my mind and my heart must have been working through some ideas and not really in the forefront of my mind, because I like a lot of these topics that just simply surface for the day, seemingly out of the blue. It's a surprise to me as well. So anyway, I just feel like so I've covered these topics before, but not in this light. So, and I don't, I do have other things to do, and so how I kind of what would be the word? I guess I try to keep the pace of addressing various topics, but I don't always have the time to go into them as thoroughly as maybe seems necessary. And so anyway, it's among that type of status as well with this is as I'm returning to this topic and it just develops in my mind according to the times and things going on and the way I'm sensing things at this moment. There's a lot that I'm seeing now as this topic is just kind of unraveled as like certain points to look into. And anyway, so we'll go into it. This story is interesting. It's the story of Joseph when he is sent into Egypt. And so I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with this story. There's various interpretations. There's a movie about it, I believe, like a children's movie. And so how do you set the stage of the story of Joseph? I'm not going to set aside my whole day to do a real thorough study on this. I'll just document the ideas that come into my mind that if I were to do a thorough study, I would think about and look to and cross-reference and whatnot. But I'm just going to, like I said, just do a quick intro to this topic for today. And so Joseph is found in Genesis. And so the book of Genesis, the first book of the scriptures, is what sets a type of template that the rest of scripture draws from, is interpreted from. It sets the stage. And a lot of people still try to interpret the rest of the book by looking and returning to Genesis time and time again to see what layers of revelation or understanding there are within Genesis. And so Genesis in the first book, let me kind of give you this setup that develops into the story of Joseph. Also what's peculiar and interesting about the story of Joseph is that this story seems to reverberate throughout the entire rest of the story, even though people don't always look at it like that. I've even heard way far back in the day, in the past, when I was I was exposing myself to a variety of different interpretations and listening to a variety of different commentators. I do recall, and I don't know, maybe this was like 20 some years ago, some pastors that do look into like end times and just really do a lot of like research and thorough analysis. They were supposing something to the effect that in the culmination of things on the global stage, probably having to do with the eschatology, the end times. And I don't necessarily mean end times in the sense of like doom and gloom, apocalyptic in that sense. I mean, it's not as though there are never those things. It's kind of like what people say is, like for me, there's different groups that have responsibility to focus on different areas of emphasis. For me, I don't always, like my, I guess, felt area of emphasis is to look at in the midst of things going off around us. What is the thing that's preserved internally? And so most of what I do isn't always to gauge what's going on out there or like what is the apocalyptic results or gauging things along the lines or interpreting it from the havoc and then finding where we're at within it. Most of how I approach it is that internal preservation of the remnant or the path or where God is at in the moment or that type of thing, if that makes sense. So even though I acknowledge there could be effects that coincide with people that study apocalyptic type stuff, that's just not my area. That for me, so that's like if we're looking at the study of what's the driving force, what's happening here, and then what's the result, and then what is the response to some of the result. Some people are responding to the result of things, and there's some legitimacy to that. But for me, it's to go even deeper and say, what's producing it, though? How did this develop? So the suggestion that some various scholars had is that culminating in the end times or like the fulfillment or the revelation of things would end up returning to the story of Joseph. I do remember that lingering in my mind years ago, and I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting because, and the reason why it kind of stuck in my mind as well was because I had previously went through a stage where I was understanding David and the experience of David on the world stage, and then I was also understanding Joseph. There's stories where understanding the experience of Joseph on the world stage, which is also interesting because a lot of things culminate in this tension between this like kingdom role of David and he's kind of exposed to certain examples of what it's like in a societal manner, the political side of things, kings, leaders, things along those lines, and the difficulties in managing that approach among people groups and the stages of difficulty, the stages of betrayal, the whole gamut, right? And so there is legitimacy when you're approaching the text where you can learn from that. But what you also find, though, is he appeals to a spiritual authority, but he's not doing the work to develop understanding of the spiritual authority. And so the role of spiritual authority is he appeals to the priests and whatnot. And so he has this political role and leadership and responsibility. And then there's the spiritual authority, right? And so a lot of scripture divides between the priests and the kings and the priests. And so what you also find then is the story of Joseph seems to be more about what it is in the midst of these outward peripheral societal tensions, the politics of it all. And then what is it to break into your spiritual centering? What is the spiritual generating activity or development that's going on? So the story of Joseph is more of an example of the spiritual occurrence within that comes from a place of where you're spiritually being connected to God, and where as you connect to God, it does affect your outward life. And so you have to kind of balance these situations of the spiritual and the political, societal dominion and whatnot. People make the suggestion that the reason why the story of Joseph as being the spiritual practice, culminating in developing the spiritual connection, is what eventually we see in Jesus, the stage of Jesus. And eventually what then kind of collects the stage of the kings and the dominion where there's a remnant through Judah. And so it's kind of this eventual confrontation of the Judah and the Joseph, which then we had seen develop throughout the whole story as Judea and Samaria. So then eventually we see Jesus as this character functioning through the path and trajectory of Judah, the remnant of Judah, like kind of coming to a head in conversation with this woman from Samaria. And you see the reemergence of this conversation that they have, and they make reference to the kings and the responsibility of the kings to finalize things or have some type of response to the temple, the authority of the temple. And so you see that in Jesus, right? He acknowledges that there's something to fulfill through the temple and this trajectory of the kings. But he also has this spiritual responsiveness, the spiritual things. And so then he's talking to this woman from Samaria that, like I said, is a connotation of this long divided history between Judah and Samaria, which started at the time of the kingdom of Solomon, which is David's son, still the line of Judah. And there's the breakdown and the separation of those kingdoms. And it begins, the breakaway begins, the revolt begins from the working force, the labor force from the house of Joseph. And so here's this woman, and there's this long division, and this remnant of Judah tends to respond to Samaria as being the apostate. So there's just this long unresolved animation, right? And so Jesus then speaks to her and makes reference to that there is a truth or a saving from or a resolving of that will come from Jerusalem through the line of Judah, through the temple authority, and then reconnect things to where it does culminate in this freedom, this finalized freedom of spiritual liberation, which is what then she responds to as saying, I claim this is prophetic word, and you're the Messiah. You're the one that will free us. And so it's interesting because then you get this culmination of Judah and the spiritual, this connection to a return to this revelation of this spiritual responsiveness and this freedom, a sense of freedom from Jerusalem. And then Jesus says, basically like a time is coming and has now come where true worshipers will worship in spirit and truth. God is spirit, and they'll no longer have to go to Jerusalem or Gerizim through these divisions and be able to have that returned responsiveness to the spiritual practice and recognition of and for and along the path of the Spirit of God. So when you see that, then some people make this suggestion where they imagine when they're trying to piece this whole long story together, how does it resolve all things? When you have this confrontation between Judah and basically like Judah and Joseph, the kings and the priests, the world stage and like the spiritual authority of God and the path of God. Even along those lines, even if it's just a story that is trying to be aligned and understood and interpreted through its own symbols, even along those lines, it's interesting to think about it. And then to think, how do we apply this to the levels of freedom that it testifies to? Along these lines, then, if people are looking at, as I was saying, the book of Genesis as this template by which they draw from ways to kind of gauge and interpret the rest of the story in the text, then the place that you find the story of Joseph is, so Genesis then starts with creation, and then it introduces the story of sin and death, getting involved in the wrong system and whatnot. And then the story of Noah, which testifies to the results of this skewed connection and the corruption of various people as they build along this improper hierarchy and basically develop corrosive interactions with one another. And then it gives this example of the Tower of Babel, which is also this skewed system that needs to be pieced apart so that it can learn to critique itself and recognize itself, which also portrays a similarity to how Jesus critiqued the rise of Solomon's kingdom, where they're pieced apart because they're building in an improper way in the similar image of like Babel and these corrupt systems and whatnot. And then from that being kind of pieced apart in a way to try to seek checks and balances to then try to regrow a type of like remnant, if there's like a remnant of responsiveness to regrow from, then you get the line of Abraham, and then it explains how through the line of Noah, there's the different sons, and then it goes into the line of Abraham. And so you see this spiritual distinction continuing to evolve and evolve and evolve. And then you get the message to Abraham being that eventually there would be some kind of like world connection or reparative approach to these systems. You get the story of Isaac that comes out of Abraham, then you get the story of Jacob. And then there's Jacob and Esau. So we'll just kind of keep it simple. So then you get the story of Jacob. Jacob then it is renamed Israel. And so then what you get after Jacob is the sons of Israel, the sons of Jacob. And to, just to recap, like Jacob had to go through some humbling experiences. What you find is various ones go through humbling experiences until they kind of give themselves over in submission to this greater call in their life. And so Jacob did go through that. And then it says that he reconciled with Esau. And it actually seemed more of his issue than Esau. So then you get this story where it introduces Jacob and his sons. This leaves off then summarizing the story of Joseph, and at a time where it portrays the benefit that he was given as he was built up in Egypt, and then through that he was then able to help the rest of them be preserved through going into Egypt at a time when there was famine, and that he created allies within Egypt. After Genesis is Exodus, and then that's where it develops into like a different establishment and administration. Generations later within Egypt then face difficulty and persecution, and then they have to redevelop another leader, which is also similar simply to this question of because if Joseph represented being in the spiritual path of God, then it also reminds us, if we're looking at it as applicable just to universal societal interactions, then you also can draw from this that you don't just arrive at, like you can't just live off of previous generations' spiritual stage of what they did 2 generations ago, or, maybe when you were growing up, or it reminds you that each generation there needs to be people developed into spiritual receptivity and connection and shifting into their responsibility to keep things going well, to keep systems healthy. So what you find is that for whatever reason, there's a lot of analysis. Eventually, through other generations, Egypt becomes corrosive against various ones, and then there's this need to develop another spiritual leader. And so then that becomes a story of Moses, where he goes through all of these different interactions. He actually initially was raised up in Egypt as well and supported through these various ones within Egypt. And then he ends up having to confront some of the dishonesty and unfair treatment within Egypt. And then that becomes the story of Moses, which is also, it's like a necessary stage of development within the story. From the stage of Moses is when you get the development of the temple system and the priests, and it's an offshoot from likenesses and lineages of the sons, the tribes of Israel, the sons of Jacob, but they're not the literal sons. So eventually it's the names of the sons and their descendants that then create this connection to the temple through the priesthood of the law of Moses, and then that goes through its stage of development as well. So now to situate ourselves with, so where do we find Joseph? So Joseph then is the story right before that, the generation before that. And so when you're looking at the stage of the development of the story of Joseph, there is no law of Moses yet. There is no priesthood, and there is no land allotment. So the story of Joseph is literally the first generation of the sons of Jacob, who is named Israel. At this time, they're living in response to spiritual call on their lives. There, like I said, there's not like a centralized spiritual authority. They respond to a spiritual stirring in their lives, and then it develops from there. And then so you see God working through that. I think it's also interesting to note when you're just reading the story and you don't have preconceived notions about who's supposed to be some type of enemy necessarily. When you read through Genesis, there really isn't these other nations that they're directly against. You know how people nowadays will try to apply the idea of like these eternal enemies, whether they're through the line of Esau or through the line of Ishmael. You don't see that in Genesis. You don't see that as a template. You see the stage when there's a spiritual authority on one of the brothers, then the rest of them kind of move on with their lives. Like Ishmael eventually develops his life and he has connections with various ones. And you see the descendants actually having some overlap of connection. But what you find is the story is just emphasizing different brothers or different ones within the descendants that have a spiritual anointing or responsibility. And then you also see that the ones that have a spiritual responsibility, it's not like always a joyous thing. It's a difficult responsibility. So it's just interesting to revisit it along those terms instead of applying our present day interpretations where people look back and they're trying to figure out who the enemy is. And what you also see is that Abraham initially was negotiating within Canaan, building connections there, had made deals there. And it wasn't just this like eternal contentious interaction. And that people were very responsive to him being initially a wholesome leader and whatnot. And wanting attributes of freedom that he seemed to represent. So there just wasn't this eternal contention that people seem to espouse. And then you also see that Jacob, in a humble way, was made through his own circumstances, his own turmoil, to then appeal to Esau, and then Esau was like receptive to it, and it says they reconciled. So what you find within Genesis is like the other groups were not always like competing for this, and it actually becomes like later through Midian and different ones on the outskirts of Egypt at the time when Egypt started to become corrosive was actually the one that helped develop Moses. And then Moses developed his spiritual calling with his assistants and in the fashion of his influence. And so there really isn't just this like continual either or. To start introducing what leads up to the story of Joseph and the other brothers, the sons of Israel, Jacob. A lot to go through, as I was saying, if I was going to do a more thorough study. And so I guess to just kind of be transparent about what I'm looking for is the way I approach the text is I look for what eventually becomes more revealed about the character of God in this story, and how people would improperly assume that God was on their side within these horrific acts and this systemic dominance and this improper hierarchy and things along those lines. And so what I'm looking for in a corrective measure, looking through what is supposed to be attributes of a spiritual freedom as we see the culmination of the story in the end, and then we retroactively look for where's that spiritual distinction happening in the story where maybe people didn't always see it. When I'm returning to this story, what I'm looking for is how they got improperly embroiled in improper violence, improper conquering, and where was there other options or opportunities. So that's what I'm looking for when I'm what I'm also, among other things, looking for when I'm returning to Genesis on how to apply it to the rest of the story. And it matters how people apply it, because then they try to justify things as what we're seeing on the world stage now with certain claims of Israel, certain justifications of animosity, and what I tend to think is improper application of the scriptures. Turn to chapter 35. We get this list of Jacob's sons. So 35, 21, starting at 21 and then so on. It says the 12 sons of Jacob, so Israel, which is Jacob, moved on again and pitched his tent beyond Migdal Eder. To 23, it says Jacob had 12 sons, the sons of Leah. So he had these various wives. So there's Leah, Rachel, Leah's maidservant Zilpah. And so from Leah, he has Reuben, the firstborn of Jacob, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. And then the sons of Rachel are Joseph and Benjamin. The sons of Rachel's maidservant are Dan and Naphtali. And Leah's maidservant are Gad and Asher. And there's a lot going on here. So what I would do if I was doing a study is, so what people might not always know is there's this strange different interactions between the sons of Leah and the sons of Rachel. And it's generally understood that the sons of Rachel is Jacob's favorite because he loved Rachel, and the sons Joseph and Benjamin are from Rachel. It kind of makes you wonder, as that's applied to the story, the reasoning there really has nothing to do with Leah. It's the story there was that Jacob was in love with Rachel. They had fell in love with each other, and he wanted to be betrothed to her. And with the understanding that he was going to marry her, he agreed to work for her father for a certain amount of years. I believe it was 7 years. So there's this whole backstory, right? And so he works for 7 years, and then they go through this marriage union. And then when he pulls the veil back, he realizes that it's not Rachel, it's Leah. And so then he feels deceived, which there also seems like some kind of reasoning that Jacob, because of his initiation into gaining the blessing and the birthright because he deceived Esau, there just continues to be this lingering unresolved deception that he falls into. So it's almost like he's learning through being humbled by his own deception falling on him. So he enters into this and he feels deceived, and he basically confronts the father like, you know, I worked all these 7 years to marry your daughter and committed myself, and then you didn't fulfill your side of the agreement. And so then he explains to him, you know, like in our custom, we can't marry off the second daughter, the younger daughter, until we marry off the older daughter. And so it's part of our agreement. So there could be maybe a technicality there. Maybe he assumed he knew, like that comes with the territory. If you're asking for the second daughter, you're also asking for the first daughter. Maybe it was a deception, but either way, that's part of the story, right? And so then he agrees to work another 7 years for the other daughter. And so there just are stories where so there's this whole backstory between Leah and Rachel. And here's the thing, it seems more told as though it has nothing to do with Leah. She just finds herself caught up in this situation where of course that's not ideal for her either. It puts her in a situation where she's basically like married into a situation that she probably would not have chose herself as well. And so there's this seeming like unresolved tension where we are introduced in the story where she probably doesn't want to be there. Jacob didn't expect her to be in that position, and it's more of like a legal obligation. And so what you're introduced to is, it's not love. It's not like a union of like spiritually knit together. It's like a obligatory cultural type thing that's probably not the best for Jacob or not the best for Leah. And so she's in this, she's like, so it kind of speaks to some things that we also need to have resolved in terms of collecting all of these testimonies where people need to be able to be personally and collectively free. And so what you then find with her, it then develops into this story where she probably feels like not as worthy, or put in a situation where, you know, maybe there's a sense of like feeling like a pawn from her father and feeling like she's not loved by Jacob. And so she's just in this situation. It's a survival mode. It's a legal situation. And so she finds herself where she, probably doesn't feel like she's totally invested in this whole collective necessarily. until eventually she becomes blessed with a child. So she becomes blessed with a child. At this time, then it talks about her giving birth to these various sons. And so through Leah, this is where Judah comes from. Judah is a son of Leah, the fourth son, I believe. At this time, then eventually Jacob is able to also marry Rachel. It takes a while it takes a while for her to be able to have children, because while they're married, she's not able to have children, and so then she uses her maidservant to obtain children through her husband. And so then she has children through her husband. And then a while later, then she's finally able to give birth to Joseph. So then that's where Joseph comes from. More to this story. There's a sense where then Jacob wants to flee from the father, from Laban, and they flee. And then this story where then Rachel takes one of the idols from the father, and then later it kind of becomes this whole story where they have to kind of reconcile this issue, these things going on with Rachel and hiding this idol. When he is fleeing from being under Laban, then to go develop his own life with his wives and whatnot, then that's when he eventually, en route to these other places, he has this confrontation with Esau. He's worried about it because of his own deception and thinking Esau is going to want to have revenge on him. And then eventually he humbles himself, but he then reconciles with Esau, and then he finds that Esau didn't really have those types of animations. Basically just introduced to a lot of this difficulty. It kind of paints this picture that love is not free, that people can't really live in the truth of what's developing in their lives. There's all these obstructions between connecting love, and then almost in the sense where all of these obstructions actually kind of ruin the love that was there in some ways and cause people to strategize in all of these various ways, right? And so what it kind of paints a picture of is that dynamic of trade and interaction and deception going on is corrosive to the relationships, and then it just keeps giving birth to complication after complication and whatnot. Because also eventually this pressure and these tensions, these obstacles, then Rachel gives birth to another child, but then she dies. She dies giving birth, and then that child is named Benjamin. So it's just really a horrific and sad and tragic story where you see deception, and then it leads to these confrontations and all of these difficulties in society, and where women are put in situations where they're seeking for the desire of their husband, and they don't obtain that, and then they have to live through vicarious strategies through their children and idol worship and token gestures of cultural obstruction. So that's the intro and the background, which then develops into Jacob's sons. Kind of makes you wonder. So if I was going to look it up more and study it more, I'd kind of look into, or I would suppose, and I would look into what could be the dynamic then of Leah's sons and Rachel's sons. And then there's the other sons, but they're from their maidservants, Leah's maidservant and Rachel's maidservant, which then is basically kind of like their sons. But you kind of wonder if there was a little bit of a competitiveness, or maybe something going on, or unresolved issues, or, the whole constellation of family dynamics and interactions and trauma, because then Rachel dies, and then they have to confront these various conflicts and whatnot. Because then what you also find, and what I would also look into, is because it seems to lay out the sons with this contention. So there's tension there. And so the firstborn son of Israel is Reuben. And it says, so in 35:21, Reuben is one of Leah's sons. And it says, Israel moved on again and pitched his tent beyond Migdal Eder. While Israel was living in that region, Reuben went in and slept with his father's concubine Bilhah, and Israel heard of it. And so in some ways, you could suppose that, of course, he feels betrayed. Israel feels betrayed. And it almost seems like a way where he's trying to usurp the authority, or he has almost like a competitiveness with the father, or maybe he picks up on resentment that maybe Leah has with him, or it's just hard to say. But or maybe it was just like some temptation. Maybe he thought there was just some strange unresolved attraction because Bilhah is Rachel's maidservant. And so, for whatever reason, there just seems to be, maybe it was some way of him thinking that he was connecting to his father in a different roundabout way, or maybe it was just some kind of like temptation because they all lived in the same household, and maybe he felt like, well, it's Rachel's maidservant, it's not like somebody, it's just hard to say. But what it does indicate, though, is some strange interaction happened there. And then it gets mentioned later later on in the story, when Jacob is giving a blessing or a word over the lives of his sons, or kind of like a summary of them, he does mention Reuben in this way. He mentions this incident with Reuben, but we'll get there. Also find that precedes this. So you kind of get this foreshadowing that there's tension within the sons of Israel. And this is why I say later that there had always been tension within Israel. There'd always been this divide between Rachel's sons and Leah's sons. And God blessing Leah through her sons because she wasn't blessed through the father or through the husband. And so she was blessed through the sons. And then Rachel was given that honor of blessing eventually to have 2 sons, but then she dies and then she gets involved in these other things. And this is just a really tragic story that this is like developed out from. But what happens is that you see that there's a little tension. There's all this tension going on. So prior to the story of Joseph, we have this story where it's the daughter of Leah, Dinah, goes... So in one of the areas where they're settling, the story of Dinah, where it says Dinah is defiled by Shechem. So as they are seeking and wandering and getting away from Laban under Rachel's father and trying to go out and develop themselves, they interact and they confront other communities and whatnot. So this is where they confront the place of Shechem. And so then Dinah goes out, one of Leah's daughters. Dinah goes out and she's hanging out with the women of the area. Sounds like she's just out. So it says, now Dinah, the daughter of Leah had born to Jacob, went out to visit the women of the land when Shechem, son of Hamor. So basically then one of Shechem's son, Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, the ruler of that area, saw her. He took her and violated her. His heart was drawn to Dinah. So here's what's like peculiar about this story. On one end, it reads that, so she goes out and she seems to be at this place with these women and whatnot. She goes into the local area. And Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, the ruler of the area, sees her and it says violates her. So on one end, it reads as though he violated her. It's hard to say because we don't have enough of the story. And on the other end, it says his heart was drawn to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the girl and spoke tenderly to her and wanted this girl as his wife, etc. And so on one end, it reads as though he loved her. And on the other side, it's interpreted that he violated her. And so it's hard to say what really happened there. This is one of those like pivotal moments in the stage that Israel develops, because they do a very life-changing thing. Their response to this is very life-changing in terms of the trajectory of what seems to be going on. Then at this time, it says, when Jacob heard that his daughter Dinah had been defiled, his sons were in the field, da-da-da-da-da. So they formulate together, right? But then Shechem's father, Hamor, went out to talk with Jacob. And now Jacob's son had come in from the fields as soon as they heard what had happened. So they're having these negotiations, right? Shechem had done a disgraceful thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter. This should not be done. So they're having this whole, it like created a whole stir, right? But Hamor said to them, my son Shechem has his heart set on your daughter. Please give him to her as his wife. Intermarry with us, give us your daughters, and take our daughters for yourselves. So basically it turns into this negotiation. The father of Shechem comes out and says, like, he's the ruler of the area, and says, like, this thing happened. On one end, they think that, like, one side of the story says that she was violated. The other side of the story is that he loved her. So it's hard to say. The reason why I'm saying it's hard to say is not because I want to discredit it. There's just not enough information on it. The reason why I'm wondering what's going on here is because this story there's a pivotal turning point. He basically, like, offers them, like, intermarry with us, give us your daughters and take our daughters for yourselves. You can settle among us. The land is open to you all. Live and trade in it and acquire property in it. So in a way, so there's a lot more here to study than it seems like. And this is what I'm saying. I'm not going to do all the preliminary stuff right now. Eventually, this becomes a place that well, let me just continue reading. Then Shechem said to Dinah's father and brothers, "Let me find favor in your eyes, and I'll give you whatever you ask. Make the price for the bride, and the gift I am to bring as great as you like, and I'll pay whatever." So he comes across as, like, on his end, he's appealing to them. Like, he loves her. He'll do whatever it takes. He wants there to be peace. He wants to share property. All of these things, which on one side sound like a good thing, if they do come into, like, proper connection. On the other side, they're saying it was a violation. They can't do this in Israel. There's resistance. So what they end up offering is, they said she was defiled, which it's hard to say because in some ways the definition of being defiled would be like sex outside of marriage. Like, they didn't go through the betrothal, and they didn't go through those stages of, like, marriage and union. And so in some categories, to be defiled would be like you're not a virgin when you're getting married and that type of thing. So they're claiming that, so there's just, like I said, not enough info to understand what was really going on there. Did she go there because she wanted to connect with various ones, or it says she was out with the women. So anyway, though, he reaches out and wants them to develop these connections. It says their response, though, is that she was defiled. And it says, Jacob's sons replied deceitfully as they spoke to Shechem and his father. And they said to them, "We can't do such a thing. We can't give our sisters to a man who's not circumcised." So this is what they offer when they're going through the negotiations, and they say, our sister can't be given to somebody that's not circumcised. And then they seem to take them up on the offer to develop these trades and connections with the area and trade wives and whatnot. But then they give them the offer of what constitutes becoming a part of their community, being part of the, like, covenant, so that they then can have that trade. And so what they offer them is the covenant of circumcision. And so they offer them the covenant of circumcision to, like, unite with them and then intermarry. And then they do that because they're so willing to have this trade going on and develop their communities together. So Hamor and his son Shechem went to the gate of their city to speak to their fellow townsmen. "These men are friendly towards us," they said. "Let them live in our land and trade in it. The land has plenty of room for them. We can marry their daughters and they can marry ours. But the men will consent to live with us as one people, only on the condition that our males become circumcised." And so basically, fast forward, all the men went out and outside of the city gate, and they agreed to be circumcised under this covenant between them. And then it says, 3 days later, while all the men were in pain, 2 of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and attacked the unsuspecting city, and then they killed every male. They put Hamor and his son Shechem to the sword and took Dinah from Shechem's house and left. The sons of Jacob came upon the dead bodies and looted the city where their sister had been defiled. They seized their flocks and herds and donkeys, everything else in their property in the city and the fields. They carried off their wealth, etc., etc., etc. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, he said, "You have brought trouble on me, making me a stench to the Canaanites and Perizzites, the people living in this land. We are few in number, and if they join forces against me and attack me and my household will be destroyed." But they replied, "Should he have treated our sister like a prostitute?" I was saying it's a peculiar story. Like, it could be that she was violated, or if they felt like she was violated, or it could be that it violated their code, like the process. It could be a little bit of a Romeo Juliet thing where they have their side of the story where they don't interact with the other side, and then there's this love story. Or it could be that she was violated. What you also find in the story is that she didn't return to say, because it says eventually they retrieve her from his house. And so she doesn't return to tell them. It seems like they get word and interpret what's going on. But either way, whether she was violated or not violated, a major aspect of the story is that they produced a false agreement. And then they utilized the covenant, by which is a sign of becoming one with a group in the eyes of God, through the circumcision at that time as a symbol, to join in agreement, to join a union. And then they utilized that to slaughter their whole community. And so that, to me, is a huge indicator of something's terrible here, even to the point where Jacob says, like, you've made a stench of me before the Canaanites and Perizzites. So this, like, usurping of power in this way, undermining the trajectory of God, continues to be something that internally occurs within various ones of the sons within the tribes of Israel. Some of them follow a path of God, and then some of them don't. Some of them seem to take the protocol seriously, and then some of them use them as like strategies to battle against other nations. So then what you find here is, because the work to develop through Jacob is not done, then it says, God said to Jacob, "Go up to Bethel and settle there, build an altar there." So God gives him this mechanism by what to do, how to strategize the next stage, because they've made this error. And he says, to the place when you were fleeing from Esau. So even to the point where it makes reference to when Jacob was fleeing from Esau because of the deception, it almost seems to foreshadow saying this was like a deception. So now you're still in this perpetual fleeing from these deceptive choices and strategies. Have to do this type of internal purge where they get rid of idol worship and like idolatry and some other things, which is a connotation of them not being in the spirit of God or the path of God, or needing to like return to it. In Genesis 35, you kind of get this story. That's what I was making reference to, where they have to flee and go through these strategies and internal cleansing. And then it says, then again, God appeared to him and blessed him. But then this is where, and so I think, so once again, if I were to study it longer, this is then after this event where God blesses him again after these internal cleansing and whatnot, and says that a nation and community of nations will come from you and kings will come from your body. And it just seems like, so some people seem to reference this as proof or evidence that God intends for there to continuously be some type of kingdom in relation to nations. This surfaces after this event. And as I was saying, I think this is why, maybe I would look into it more, but why some people think that this justifies this stage, as though this trajectory of through some of the sons of Leah, which also includes Judah and various ones, that they were correct in this, and then they become a kingdom. But it almost seems to be one of the things and factors where it portrays, because eventually it doesn't justify kingdoms in the sense of the kingdoms are correct. A lot of the long-term goal is to dismantle kingdoms. And so in some ways, when you're reading it, it could mean this is a concession because of what they've done. They aligned themselves into methods of kingdoms. And so in some ways, you could suggest it's not as though God is saying part of the ultimate vision is to become a kingdom in that way, but that now it's not only this developing of nations, but now it has to deal with kingdoms. So I guess what I'm saying is I don't think that is justifying these stories. I think it's portraying an outcome of what also now needs to be resolved, that it spilled over into territories of kingdoms and rulers and whatnot. The thing that you then perpetually find is this contention within Israel. And so then that's what is introduced in the story of Joseph, where Joseph then, it talks about, it switches to this next story. Chapter 37, Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. And this is the account of Jacob. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks. And also just a quick note, this is the stage where God is helping them strategize where to go to develop themselves, because they had made that error, because his sons fighting that battle had made them vulnerable. And so it also gives this connotation that the places where previous generations had made negotiations and friendly connections within Canaan is where they're now going to develop. And so it just seems to suppose that the work that Abraham had done was friendly connections within Canaan, where it's a place where they can go and develop and feel safe as they're escaping from the plight of various surrounding nations that might want to have revenge on them. It introduces them basically like kind of fast forward, living their lives. And Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And he brought their father a bad report about them. It says, now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other brothers, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made a richly ornamented robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, listen to this dream I have. So anyway, he introduces his dream. It's this short story of the introduction of Joseph that we get. The other brothers don't like Joseph. Joseph seems to be the father's favorite because he was born in his old age. And Joseph seems to have this certain spiritual receptivity. He has these various dreams, and then he brings these ideas of these dreams to his brothers, and they hate him even more for it, even to the point where the father is at, like, kind of it says father actually rebuked him as well, like, why are you saying these, what is this dream you had? But he says he kept the matter in mind, because he's like, it makes it seem like when you're sharing these dreams that you think that we're all going to worship or appeal to you or something like that. But he keeps it in mind, and the other brothers hate him for it. It doesn't really, it's hard, it's a short story, so it's hard to say, like, what was the connotation there? Was he just telling them, like, I'm having this experience, what is it? Or was he, did it come across as that he's bragging about it, or does he have concern? Because it says he even reported some bad things going on with the brothers. Is he developing some type of, like, a worry or concern about things going on? Either way, though, the basic point of this short introduction is that he has some kind of spiritual responsiveness through these dreams, to the point where it doesn't, like, his father loves him, but his father is even suspicious of it. And then it makes his brothers hate him, and that there seems to be some tension going on with the brothers. Very short, though, eventually at some other point in reference, Joseph is sent out to the fields to send a message to his brothers. And so he's out there looking for his brothers. I think there's more symbolism to this as well if I were doing more of a study, because it makes reference to him going out to, it says, so he's out there and he's looking for them. And then someone sees him, and someone says, basically, like, who are you looking for? And he says, I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they are? And they say they've moved on from here. And the man answered, I heard them say, let's go to Dothan. So there seems to be a highlight there, something to do with the history of Dothan. And it makes reference to the time of the kings. And so it seems to, maybe be foreshadowing some of the tension that develops with the time of the kings. But at this point in Genesis, we're not at the time of the kings yet. They haven't developed that stage yet. Approaching his brothers, so Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan, but they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. "Here comes that dreamer," they said to each other. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. "Let's not take his life," he said. "Don't shed any blood. Throw him into this cistern here in the desert, but don't lay a hand on him." Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. So here's also, the plot thickens, right? Especially if we're trying to look at this as to what it foreshadows in the future. So you have the brothers that want to kill him, right? They're just like, here's this dreamer. We have this opportunity. We're out here in the middle of nowhere. Let's kill him and throw him into the cistern. So then you have Reuben speak up and says, don't do that. Let's just throw him in the cistern. Just leave it. Don't have his blood on our hands, something like that. So he says, he said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. So it's interesting here because later on, there's this tension between the father's response to Reuben. And so it almost does seem like, is Reuben trying to earn the father's love? Is he kind of because he's the firstborn. Reuben is the firstborn. And so I think there's something significant about Reuben. And looking at the stage of the firstborn, typically in some sense, the firstborn would have the inheritance, right? Then you have the firstborn that is Reuben from Leah and the firstborn that is Joseph from Rachel. And you would think that Reuben would seem to be more at odds with Joseph because of this division between Leah and Rachel in reference to the father. But it seems that Reuben actually has some type of connection possibly with the house of Joseph, which is strange. So I feel like there's more to look at there in what the Reuben character represents as the actual firstborn, and how he's not seeming in contention with Joseph, but there's tension that the father has toward him, which almost seems to be, if you're looking at family constellation, a blind spot of Jacob, because he has this history of tension between the firstborn from tension with his brother and his blessing being developed through some deception. So there's just so much going on here that's unresolved. Story of Joseph. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the richly ornamented robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. Now the cistern was empty, there was no water in it. As they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed. So it's also interesting at this point now. So you have Reuben that kind of steps in to make a corrective measure. And then you have Judah that steps in to make a lesser plight. So it kind of does make you wonder, though, because it does introduce the story, because there was this tension between Leah's sons and Rachel's son. But then in the introduction, if you go back to 37, it's Joseph was with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah. So the maidservants. And so it makes you wonder, was it the maidservants that were in more contention with Joseph? Was there contention there? And then was it some of the other sons of Levi, or of Leah, Levi and Simeon? But anyway, it doesn't exactly say. But we just see, among the brothers, the ones that step up to change the stage of things, is Reuben lessens the sentencing and Judah lessens the sentencing by selling him into Egypt. Here's a story where through Judah they sell Joseph to the Ishmaelites, and then the Ishmaelites bring him into to Egypt. It says, so it says here in 37:26, Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to Ishmaelites who took him to Egypt. So this is where you get the introduction of the Ishmaelites and the Midianites in reference to Egypt, which is interesting because, during the story of Moses, it's the Midianites in the outskirts that help Moses. So when Reuben returned to the cistern and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. Interesting too, because now you're seeing that Reuben didn't know that Judah did this. So Reuben assumes that he's dead. He went back to his brothers and said, "The boy isn't there. Where can I turn now?" Then they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. They took the ornamented robe back to their father and said, "We found this. Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe." So basically they're developing it into where his father will interpret that he's dead. And at this point, it seems Reuben thinks he's dead as well. He recognized it and said, "It is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son many days. Forward it says, "Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard." And at this point, the Midianites and Ishmaelites, it's not like they're told who this person is. They're just kind of like in between of the story. It introduces this story of Judah in between this, which is interesting and something worth examining as well, because you have to be reminded, Judah becomes the remnant by which Jesus comes through, by which they try to have perpetual claims to the line of David for the kingdom, not the priesthood, but the kingdom. I was saying, there's all this tension. It's not really the story is pretty messy. So at the time, Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with a man of Adullam named Hira. There, Judah met the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua. He married her and lay with her, and she became pregnant and gave birth to the son who was named She conceived again and gave birth to a son and named him Onan. She gave birth to another, and his name was Shelah. The things that Judah kind of goes through, Judah got a wife from his firstborn was Tamar, but Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death. Basically, his firstborn died. Then Judah said to Onan, "Lie with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law." But basically to have children and whatnot, so that her lineage can go forward. But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his, and so whenever he lay with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from producing offspring for his brother. What he did was wicked in the sights of the Lord, so he was put to death as well. Peculiar story about Judah, right, and his sons. So you're obviously seeing that there's some strange stuff happening with his life. Judah then said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Live as a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up," for he thought he may die too, just like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's house. Why this is also interesting is because when you start to be introduced to the story of Jesus in the Gospels of Matthew chapter 1, there's this genealogy where you see that the line of Judah, because eventually, through a long, complicated story, the remnant of Israel is just through Judah, in terms of like on the world stage with the kingdoms and whatnot. And so then everyone's looking for their Messiah to come through the line of Judah, and the line of, perpetuating the line of David. And so it introduces this connection to the line of Judah through Tamar, this woman that we're talking about, this complicated story. So what you also find through the line of Jesus through Matthew 1 genealogy is there's a lot of scandal in this genealogy that Judah comes from. And so what you're also reminded, because there's like what I'm reading about now, what happens with Judah and Tamar after his sons die, and then there's other stories in the perpetuation of what goes on, their connections with Boaz and Ruth, and etc., etc., etc. Going on and on through this complicated genealogy, and then it results in Joseph, the father of Jesus, eventually in the gospel narrative. So anyway, going back to the story of Judah. So here's Judah. 2 of his sons had died. They didn't redeem the lineage of his firstborn through having offspring with the wife that lived. So eventually you get this story where Judah tells Tamar, go live as a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up, because then maybe offspring will come from them. After a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. When Judah had recovered from his grief, he went up to Timnah to the men who were shearing his sheep, and his friend Hira, the Adulamite, went with him. When Tamar was told, your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear sheep, she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and then she sat down at the entrance of the Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that though Shelah had not grown up, she saw that though Shelah had now grown up, she had not been given to him as his wife. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. Not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, he went over to her by the roadside and said, come now, let me sleep with you. And what will you give me to sleep with you? She asked. I'll send you a young goat from my flock, he said. Will you give me something as a pledge until you send it? She asked. He said, what pledge should I give you? Your seal and its cord, the staff in your hand, she answered. So he gave them to her and slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. After she left, she took off her veil and put on her widow's clothes again. Meanwhile, Judah sent the young goat by his friend, the Adulamite, in order to get his pledge back from the women. But he did not find her. He asked the men who lived there, where's the shrine prostitute who was beside the road at Enaim? There hasn't been a shrine prostitute here, they said. So he went back to Judah and said, I didn't find her. Besides, the men who lived there said there hasn't been any shrine prostitute here. Then Judah said, let her keep what she has, or we will become a laughingstock. After all, I did send her this young goat, but you didn't find her. About 3 months later, Judah was told, your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution, and as a result, she is now pregnant. Judah said, bring her out and have her burned to death. As she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. I am pregnant by the man who owns these, she said, and she added, see if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are. Judah recognized them and said, she is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah. And he did not sleep with her again. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb, and she was giving birth. As she was giving birth, one of them put out his hand. So the midwife took a scarlet thread and tied it on his wrist and said, this one came out first. But when he threw back his hand, his brother came out, and she said, so this is how you have broken out. And he was named Perez. Then his brother, who had the scarlet thread on his wrist, came out, and he was given the name Zerah. So this is another portion where it seems to be kind of foreshadowing other types of symbolism. But what you also find at this point is there really are a lot of scoundrels. There's a lot of strategy, and because of the system not really being liberated and people being under various ones like authority and whatnot, there's just a lot of strategizing and you're not finding people entering into their own spiritual, like, inward alignment and compass. You see that they have to strategize through these other outward measures, and it selects for a lot of scheming and deceiving various ones. What I seem to find is that a lot of time seems to pass, and so Joseph is now in Egypt, right? Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of the Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. And so he left in Joseph's care everything he had. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. So what you're actually finding is that the character, at least story-wise, of Joseph is coming out, and he seems to be very trustworthy, to the point where one of the major leaders of Egypt trusts him and notices that he has a blessing on his life, and he trusts him with all of his possessions. And so he is risen to this place of opportunity and connection, and they see the potential that he has and whatnot. But then develops, it says, now Joseph was well built and handsome, and after a while his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, come to bed with me. But he refused. With me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. One day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by the cloak and said, come to bed with me. But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her household servants. Look, she said to them, this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. She kept his cloak beside her until the master came home. Then she told him this story. That Hebrew slave you brought us came to me to make sport of me. But as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. When his master heard the story, his wife told him, saying, this is how your slave treated me. He burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. So what you find at this stage of the story is that you would almost say that there was already a redemption where he was betrayed by certain ones among the brothers. Some of the brothers did help him, and then they have their own generating story that's going to go through all these various stages, all these side stories, right? That foreshadow what is to come. And then you have the story of Joseph, where now he's sold into Egypt, and he's given favor, and the leadership seems to be responsive to his potential and the blessing in his life and his honesty and whatnot. And so they put him in a position of influence to grow and develop him. But then what do you see is the seeming downfall? So then it's introduced to this woman that she's also attracted to him, but she wants to have him for herself. She wants to sleep with him. She has a certain attraction to him. And so then she has this plot where she basically, because he refuses, because of his honesty and because of him being consistently honest to Potiphar, then she schemes against him and lies and creates a false story that he had done all of these things to her. And for a certain time, then it seems that he believes her. He believes that she's saying that he did all of these things and is plotting against her and was attacking her and all of these things, right? And so it's kind of one of those stories where you see the development of the lie and how powerful the lie is. And so it takes him from being, basically almost at the height of being honored and blessed and developing to set the stage for like a even more blessing. It seems to take that all away. It seems to take that all away from him and put him in some of the worst conditions where he's lied about and then he's sentenced to where the king's prisoners are confined, right? So then it takes him from that position and he's betrayed once again. So sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king, but what we also see is even there he has a blessing. So even his presence being there, it says the warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. Because it was saying while Joseph was in there in the prison, the Lord was with him and he showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. And so he's in this other situation, but the blessing is still developing and it's being repositioned, right? So sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. From one of the Pharaoh's officials where he was blessed, but now through prison he's having connection to those that are put in prison that are prisoners of the king, the Pharaoh. Sometime later, the cupbearers and the bakers of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard in the same prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended them. After they had been in custody for some time, each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were held in prison, had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in the master's house, "Why are your faces so sad today?" "We both had dreams," they answered, "but there is no one to interpret them." Then Joseph said to them, Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said to him, "In my dream I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in his hand." "This is what it means," Joseph said to him. "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift your head and restore you to your position, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. For I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even there I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon." When the chief baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation, he said to Joseph, "I too had a dream. On my head were 3 baskets of bread. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head." "This is what it means," Joseph said. "The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat away your flesh." Now the 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for all his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position so that he once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he changed the chief baker just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. When 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing by the Nile, when out of the river there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed among the reeds, and after them 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came up out of the Nile and stood beside those on the river bank. And the cows that were ugly and gaunt ate up the 7 sleek, fat cows. Then Pharaoh woke up. He fell asleep again, and he had a second dream. 7 heads of grain, healthy and good, were growing on a single stalk. After them 7 other heads of grain sprouted, thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy, full heads. Then Pharaoh woke up, and it had been a dream. In the morning his mind was troubled, so he sent for all the magicians, the wise men of Egypt. Pharaoh told them his dream, but no one could interpret them for him. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "Today I am reminded of my shortcomings. Pharaoh was once angry with his servants, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker in his house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. Now a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream. And things turned out exactly as he interpreted them to us. I was restored to my position, and the other man was hanged." So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." "I cannot do it," Joseph replied to Pharaoh, "but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "In my dream I was standing on the bank of the Nile, when out of the river there came up 7 cows, fat and sleek, and they grazed among the reeds. After them 7 other cows came up, scrawny and very ugly and lean. I had never seen such ugly cows in all of the land of Egypt. The lean, ugly cows ate up the 7 fat cows that came up first. Then, even after they ate them, no one could tell that they had done so. They looked just as ugly as before. Then I woke up. In my dreams I also saw 7 heads of grain, full and good, growing on a single stalk. After them 7 others had sprouted, withered and thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 good heads. And I told this to the magicians, but none could explain it to me. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, "The dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads of grain are 7 years. It is one and the same dream. The 7 lean, ugly cows that came up afterward are 7 years, and so are the 7 worthless heads of grain scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. It is just as I said to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all the abundance in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered, because the famine that follows it will be so severe. The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. And now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Then let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all of the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine." The plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his officials, so Pharaoh asked them, "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. And he had him ride in a chariot as his second in command. And men shouted before him, "Make way!" Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, but without your words no one will lift hand or foot in all Egypt. He gave Joseph the name Zaphanath Paneah, and gave him Asenath, daughter of Potipharah, priest of On, to be his wife. And Joseph went throughout the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout Egypt. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced plentifully. Joseph collected all the food produced in those 7 years of abundance in Egypt and stored it in the cities. In each city he put the food grown in the fields surrounding it. Joseph stored up huge quantities of grain, like the sand of the sea. It was so much that he stopped keeping records because it was beyond measure. Before the years of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph by Asenath, daughter of Potipharah, priest of On. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh and said, It is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. The second son he named Ephraim and said, It is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. So there's a lot of reading that I did there. But on this other part, if I were to do more of a study, I would look into the connections that Joseph had with the Pharaoh's daughter and their children, and look into what it talks about here when it says the priest of On. But I'm just saying, like, if I was doing more of a thorough study here. Also, the stage, if we were doing a study on following the sons of Israel, then later there's this so you see here that Joseph has 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. What later happens after this whole stage, this is the stage of Joseph, but then in the book of Exodus then becomes the development of the stage of Moses, which is some generations later. After Moses and then after the Exodus, when they are in the wilderness and being established into this nation unto the priests, in the book of Numbers, it lays out the land allotments for the 12 sons. But at this point, instead of naming Joseph, it names his sons Ephraim and Manasseh. And then it also excludes the tribe of Levi from being numbered among the sons and to be set apart for the work of the temple, and their inheritance not being land, but their inheritance being God in the temple. Also, you can possibly wonder, if I was doing a study, as I was saying, Levi, you can ponder, why would Levi be set apart for the work of the temple? But what you also see in the history of Levi was that time at Shechem, and where they're reprimanded, where Simeon and Levi are reprimanded for improperly using the covenant of God. And so it almost seems to suggest that maybe they don't, maybe to some degree there's some atonement that needs to be made, that they can't be given land. It's hard to say, but there is some kind of symbolism there where the tribe of Levi is set apart to work and commit themselves to the temple, of which then atonement is developed out from. And so then seems like what you see foreshadowed here is that through Levi being set apart and not giving a land allotment, then among the land, Joseph is given a double portion where his sons are counted twice in the land allotments, Ephraim and Manasseh. So that's later on after Moses, the stage of Moses in the book of Numbers, chapter 1, or the first few chapters where it references the tribes. Later on in Genesis 49, so it'll continue. So I left off reading Genesis 41, chapter 41, and then it'll progress through the story of Joseph in Egypt, and then eventually through the stage of the famine. It causes everyone in the region to have to go and appeal to Egypt. And so then it's through that stage of things where Jacob then sends the brothers to go into Egypt to request food because the famine over all of the territory and the land and the outskirts. And so this is also where you get introduced that Canaan is under in some ways, like under Egypt, in the sense of the proximity of the surrounding nations. And then these surrounding nations have to come and appeal to Egypt to get like rations of food. It then, through this stage of things, situates Joseph as being that which the brothers then confront again. He sees them and he confronts them. And this is sometime later where he's already developed his life. He's situated and he's blessed in Egypt. And then he's reintroduced to them through life, basically reintroducing them to him. And then it goes on to that story, right? So I'll just kind of do a quick overview of that story, and then just kind of introducing Jacob as he gives his blessing, or his words. They're not all seen as much as a blessing, but his words over his sons. So the 7 years of abundance in Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. There was famine in all the other lands, and in the whole land of Egypt there was food. When all Egypt began to feel the famine, the people cried to Pharaoh for food. Then Pharaoh told all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph and do what he tells you." When the famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians for the famine. The famine was severe throughout Egypt, and all the countries came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe in all the world. It's also interesting that they use words like in all the world. And then 42, when Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he sent to his sons, "Why do you just keep looking at each other?" He continued, "I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us, so that we may live and not die." Then 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt, but Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with the others because he was afraid that harm might come to him. So Israel's sons were among those who went to buy grain, for the famine was in the land of Canaan also. It kind of makes you wonder if Jacob, because he said that, like protecting Benjamin, if he questioned that the brothers had done something, like, so it also makes you feel like there's this perpetual unresolved like breakthrough among the family, like it's harboring this contention and suspicion and whatnot. So they then are made to go down to, so Israel's sons were among those who went to buy grain for the famine in the land of Canaan also. Now Joseph was the governor of the land, the one who sold grain to all its people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. As soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. "Where do you come from?" he asked. "From the land of Canaan," they replied, to buy food. So what's also really interesting here is like this is a stage where Joseph's initial dream that he had when he was younger, that he didn't really seem to know what to think about it, is starting to come to fruition, where his brothers are now bowing down to him, and there's these like symbolism of grain and whatnot. And so it's all these years later, and it's likely that Joseph probably looks more like an Egyptian, and they don't recognize him. They don't seem to recognize who he is. And they've also grown up and whatnot. "Where do you come from?" he asks, but he recognizes them. "From the land of Canaan," they replied, "to buy food." Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. And then he remembered his dreams about them and said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see where our land is unprotected." "No, my lord," they answered. "Your servants have come to buy food. We are all the sons of one man." "Your servants are honest men, not spies." "No," he said to them, "you have come to see where our land is unprotected." But they replied, "Your servants were 12 brothers, the sons of one man, who lives in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no more." Joseph said to them, "It is just as I told you, you are spies, and this is how you will be tested. As surely as Pharaoh lives, you will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of your number to get your brother, The rest of you will be kept in prison, so that your words may be tested to see if you are telling the truth. If you are not, then as surely as Pharaoh lives, you are spies." And he put them all in custody for 3 days. On the third day, Joseph said to them, "Do this and you will live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers stay here in prison, while the rest of you go and take grain back for your starving households. But you must bring your youngest brother to me, so that your words may be verified and that you may not die." This they proceeded to do. They said to one another, "Surely we are being punished because of our brother." They saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. "That's why this distress has come upon us." Reuben replied, "Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must give an accounting for his blood." They did not realize that Joseph could understand them, since he was using an interpreter. He turned away from them and began to weep, but then turned back and spoke to them again. He had Simeon taken from them and bound before their eyes. So what's interesting here, there's a lot of interesting things here. For one, you find that Joseph had gone through a tremendous trauma, and now he's confronting his brothers. And so what it seems like you're noticing is he's moved on with his life, and there's every standard that could say he's blessed in his life. So he's blessed, but then you see that when he's confronted with his brothers, it all seems to be coming back to him. And so you also see that he has what seems to be some resentment, right? He can't, even though he has this success, he seems like he can't just let it go. There seems to be resentment. There seems to be the trauma surfacing. He's confronted with the situation, and he seems to want to put them in their place or cause truth to come out from them, as though there's this lingering deception and scheme and lies. And so you also see that it almost seems like, some of his humanity, where through most of the story, he's very poised and he's seen as having this blessing, and the very presence of him seems to bring peace to various ones. And so when he's in reference to that type of responsiveness in his life, you see this peace and this calm and development. But when he's confronted with his brothers and whatnot, and this past of these things going on and what it represents, there's this different side to him. There's unresolved trauma. There's resentment. It seems like there's this unresolved need for truth. It says here, so that your words may be tested to see if you're telling the truth. And he's seeing that they're still lingering in dishonesty, that there's still this animated suspension of turmoil and lack of truth. And you see that also in the father not having trust in them and not wanting to send the other son, and there's just a lack of breakthrough there. What you also see is there's some connotation here about atonement. So it's interesting that this will lead into what we're talking about in terms of atonement. There is this sense where because of their dishonesty and because of the way that they're conducting themselves, and it's perpetuating in this animated, suspended way by which their whole family and that the nation, I guess you would say, well, the nucleus of what will become a nation is caught in this gridlock. And so there needs to be some type of realignment and atonement and breakthrough. So interesting that it seems to be producing the surfacing of emotion in him. And so it does seem to have this connotation that there's a wound there, there's a trauma there. And not only is the deception harming the other side of groups, the ones that had been deceived, the ones trying to move on with their life, and continual distrust and whatnot, but that there's a trauma, there's a wound there. They betrayed his humanity and whatnot. You get on, this story continues. Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain, to put each man's silver back in his sack, and to give them provisions for their journey. After this was done for them, they loaded their grain on their donkeys and left. At the place where they stopped for the night, one of them opened his sack to get feed for his donkey, and he saw his silver in the mouth of his sack. "Silver has been returned," he said to his brothers. "Here it is in my sack." Their hearts sank, and they turned to each other trembling and said, "What is this that God has done to us?" When they came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan, they told him all that had happened to them. They said, "The man who is Lord over the land spoke harshly to us and treated us as though we were spying on the land. But we said to him, 'We are honest men, we are not spies. We were 12 brothers, sons of one father. One is no more, and the youngest is now with our father in Canaan.' Then the man who is Lord over the land said to us, 'This is how I will know whether you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers here with me, and take food for your starving households and go. But bring your youngest brother to me, so that I will know that you are not spies but honest men. Then I will give your brother back to you, and you can trade in the land.' As they were emptying their sacks," so here, even reading through this, it almost seems to give connotation to the trade. So the story with Dinah, even, where there were negotiations with those outside, and how their claims were that they were wronged. And so now it's like Joseph is one that's on the side of the quote-unquote rulers and Lord over the land, and then you have the sons of Jacob making claims as to, like, they're against them, and kind of plotting against them and as Lord over the land. And what you're finding is there's areas of dishonesty functioning through this perpetuation of things. And so it also seems to speak into what could have potentially been, so like in every kingdom dynamic and divide, there's these, it seems to be portraying, there's like areas of unresolved dishonesty, unresolved deception in these like different factions of groups, and where they're producing interpretations unto those unresolved perpetuations and entangled scenarios. And so it does almost even seem like the claims that had been against the other groups in terms of the difficulty to create trade among different territories and dominions. That it says, "Then the man who is Lord over the land said to us, 'This is how I will know whether you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers here with me, and take food for your starving households and go. But bring your youngest brother to me, so that I will know that you are not spies but honest men. Then I will give your brother back to you, and you can trade in the land.' As they were emptying their sacks, there in each man's sack was his pouch of silver. When they and their father saw the money pouches, they were frightened. Their father Jacob said to them, 'You have deprived me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and now you want to take Benjamin. Everything is against me.' Then Reuben said to his father, 'You may put both of my sons to death if I do not bring him back to you. Entrust him to my care, and I will bring him back.' But Jacob said, 'My son will not go down there with you.'" So it's interesting now that Reuben has continually been playing this role as almost like a seeming connection between Rachel's sons and Leah's sons. Because Benjamin is the one, like Reuben's the one that actually tried to help Joseph, and then Benjamin is the last one that he thinks has survived. And Reuben then is also thinking that he doesn't know that Joseph is still alive. Then you see Reuben, one of the other sons, taking care of Benjamin, and then there's going to be this resolve with Joseph. Then Reuben said to his father, "You may put both of my sons to death if I do not bring him back to you. Entrust him to my care, and I'll bring him back." But Jacob said, "My son will not go down there with you. His brother is dead, and he is the only one left. If harm comes to him on the journey you are taking, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in sorrow. Also interesting here is like, because I've been doing these studies on the book of Zechariah, and how the book of Zechariah seems to have this portrayal in this stage of there is kind of like this template. So if people are saying this template of the story of Joseph connects to eventually what resolves the entanglement and aligns things into liberation, spiritual liberation through Jesus, there's also what seems to be a stage of a similar dynamic in the book of Zechariah, which some will say is a picture of Jesus, which I do think at some level there is a picture of what Jesus enters into, similar to the story of Joseph and the brothers. But the book of Zechariah actually seems to be the stage of showing progression through Cyrus. And so the stage that people make reference to Jesus seems to be at the stage of noting that Cyrus is the anointed one in the lineage of kings at that time. Cyrus and their redeveloping connection to the temple in the book of Zechariah. And there's a stage where they're coming out of Babylon, and they're trying to rebuild the temple so that they can draw out of Babylon those of Israel that are in the iniquities of Babylon. That's what it seems to be saying. And so what's interesting there is it portrays this basket full of wickedness, and there's this lead lid or something to that effect. And it has to go out, and then basically it's kind of getting them to understand the repentance of rebuilding the temple, which is a place of atonement, of which then they can reestablish remedying the conflicts of the kingdoms, which you see through Cyrus, through the temple. And so what's interesting in Zechariah, there's this story about this basket in Babylon and the iniquities. And it almost seems to portray this story as well here, where it has the brothers and the baskets of grain. And what you're following here in the story is that Joseph is trying to force them into a confrontation of truth. And you're seeing that they're functioning in, there's a lack of truth there. There's like iniquities, right? And so through this, it kind of seems like he's framing them, but he's also like strategizing this confrontation where they went to pay for grain with their silver, and they find that the silver was still in their bags, and so they're terrified now because they think that they're going to be they're convicted of stealing, that they didn't pay. When they went to fill up the grain, Joseph told the people to leave the silver in the bag. So now that they think that it's going to come across as they didn't pay, like they stole the grain. And so that's what it seems like. And they think their son is going, they don't know if they can go back and retrieve Simeon or bring the other brother, and they're just becoming terrified. But what it seems here is this sense of like this silver confronts them in like their iniquities and whatnot. And so it kind of seems like that story of the basket, and they say put the lead over the top. I don't know, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But anyway, so let's continue on with the story. Now the famine was still severe in the land, so when they had eaten all the grain that they had brought from Egypt, their father said to them, "Go back and buy us a little more food." But Judah said to him, "The man warned us solemnly, 'You will not see my face again unless my brother is with you. If you will send your brother along with us, we will go down and buy food for you. But if you do not send him, we will not go down, because the man said to us, 'You will not see my face again unless your brother is with you.'" Israel asked, "Why did you bring this trouble on me by telling the man you had another brother?" They replied, "The man questioned us closely about ourselves and our family. 'Is your father still living?' he asked us. 'Do you have another brother?' We simply answered his questions. How are we to know he would say, 'Bring your brother down here'?" Then Judah said to Israel his father, "Send the boy along with me, and we will go at once, so that we and you and our children may live and not die." Point that you can see they were just avoiding going back because of this situation, but now they're in a place where they have to because of the grain. "I myself would guarantee his safety. You can hold me personally accountable for him if I do not Bring him back to you and set him before you. I will bear the blame before you all my life. You're seeing that Reuben basically made that claim, and said, or you can take my son's life if I don't bring him back. And then Judah is now basically saying, I'll also take the blame. I'll personally take the blame for all of my life. And so you're slowly getting these subtle confrontations happening. As it is, if we had not delayed, we could have gone and returned twice. Then their father Israel said to them, if it must be, then do this. Put some of the best products of the land in your bags and take them down to the man as a gift, a little balm and a little honey, some spices, myrrh, some pistachios, nuts, and almonds. Take double the amount of silver with you, for you must return the silver that was put back into the mouths of your sacks. Perhaps it was a mistake. Take your brother also and go back to the man at once, and may God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, so that he will let your other brother and Benjamin come back with you. As for me, if I am bereaved, I am bereaved. So the men took the gifts and double the amount of silver, and Benjamin also. They hurried down to Egypt and presented themselves to Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of his house, take these men to my house, slaughter an animal, and prepare dinner. They are to eat with me at noon. The man did as Joseph told him, took the men to Joseph's house. Now the men were frightened. When they were taken to his house, they thought, we were brought here because of this silver that was put into our sacks the first time. He wants to attack us and overpower us and seize us as slaves and take our donkeys. So they went up to Joseph's steward and spoke to him at the entrance to the house. Please, sir, they said, we came down here the first time to buy food, but at the place where we stopped for the night, we opened our sacks, and each of us found his silver, the exact weight in the mouth of his sacks. So we have brought it back with us. We have also brought additional silver with us to buy food. We don't know who put silver in our sacks. It's all right, he said. Don't be afraid. Your God, the God of your father, has given you treasure in your sacks. I received your silver. Then he brought Simeon out to them. The steward took the men into Joseph's house, gave them water to wash their feet, and provided fodder for their donkeys. They prepared their gifts for Joseph's arrival at noon, because they had heard that they were to eat there. When Joseph came home, they presented to him the gifts they had brought into the house, and they bowed down before him to the ground. He asked them how they were, and then he said, how is your aged father you told me about? Is he still living? They replied, your servant our father is still alive and well, and they bowed low to pay him honor. As he looked about and saw his brother Benjamin, his own mother's son, he asked, Is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about? And he said, God be gracious to you, my son. Deeply moved at the sight of his brother, Joseph hurried out and looked for a place to weep. He went into his private room and wept there. After he had washed his face, he came out and controlling himself, said, serve the food. They served him by himself, the brothers by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because Egyptians could not eat with Hebrews, for that is detestable to Egyptians. Then men had been seated. So what's interesting there is that, obviously he is a Hebrew, but at this point he's like an Egyptian, right? The men had been seated before him in the order of their ages, from the firstborn to the youngest, and they looked at each other in astonishment. When portions were served to them from Joseph's table, Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as anyone else's, so they feasted and drank freely with him. Joseph gave these instructions to the steward of his house: fill the men's sacks with as much food as they can carry, and put each man's silver in the mouth of his sack. Then put my cup, the silver one, in the mouth of the youngest one's sack, along with the silver for his grain. And he did as Joseph said. As morning dawned, the men were sent on their way with their donkeys. They had not gone far from the city when Joseph said to the steward, go after these men at once, and when you catch up with them, say to them, Why have you repaid good with evil? Isn't this the cup my master drinks from and also uses for divination? This is a wicked thing you've done." When they caught up with them, he repeated these words to them. But they said to him, "Why does my Lord say such things? Far be it from your servants to do anything like that. We even brought back to you from the land of Canaan the silver we found inside the mouths of our sacks. So why would we steal silver or gold from the master's house? If any of your servants is found to have done it, he will die. The rest of us will become my Lord's slaves." "Very well then," he said. "Let it be as you say. Whoever is found to have it will become my slave, and the rest of you will be free from blame." They say, "If any of your servant is found to have it, he will die, and the rest of us will become my Lord's slaves." But then he says, "Very well then," he said. "Let it be as you say. Whoever is found to have it will become my slave. The rest of you will be free from blame." Each of them quickly lowered his sack to the ground and opened it, and then the steward proceeded to search, beginning with the oldest and ending with the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. At this, they tore their clothes. Then they all loaded their donkeys and returned to the city. What's interesting here, there's just so much confrontation going on, because even though now he has a claim to Benjamin, the brothers had claimed to their father that they would dedicate their lives, or through Judah and Reuben, if they didn't bring him back, and so they have to bring Benjamin back. Joseph was still in the house when Judah and his brothers came in, and they threw themselves to the ground before him. Joseph said to them, "What is this you have done? Don't you know that a man like me can find things out by divination?" "What can we say to my lord?" Judah replied. "What can we say? How can we prove our innocence? God has uncovered your servant's guilt. We are now my lord's slaves, we ourselves and the one who was found to have the cup." But Joseph said, "Far be it from me to do such a thing. Only the man who was found to have the cup will become my slave. The rest of you go back to your father in peace." Then Judah went up to him and said, "Please, my lord, let your servant speak a word to my lord. Do not be angry with your servant, though you are equal to Pharaoh himself." My lord asked his servants, "Do you have a father or a brother?" And we answered, "We have an aged father, and there is a young son born to him. Old age, his brother is dead, and he is the only one of his mother's sons left, and his father loves him." Then you said to your servants, "Bring him down to me so that I can see him for myself." And we said to my lord, "The boy cannot leave his father. If he leaves him, his father will die." But you told your servants, "Unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you will not see my face again." When we went back to the servant my father, we told him what my lord had said. Then our father said, "Go back and buy a little more food." But we said, "We cannot go down, only if your youngest brother is with us, and we will go. We cannot see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us." Your servant my father said to us, "You know that my wife bore me 2 sons. One of them went away from me, and I said, 'He has surely been torn to pieces,' and I have not seen him since. If you take this one from me too, and harm comes to him, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in misery. So now, if the boy is not with us when I go back to your servant my father, and if my father, whose life was closely bound up with the boy's life, see that the boy isn't there, he will die. Your servants will bring the gray head of our father down to the grave in sorrow." Your servant guaranteed the boy's safety to my father. I said, "If I do not bring him back to you, I will bear the blame before you, my father, all my life. Now then, please let your servant remain here as my lord's slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No, do not let me see the misery that would come upon my father." Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence." So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt." And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will not be plowing and reaping, but God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives from a great deliverance, or by a great deliverance. So it's interesting here. So now Joseph reveals to them, like, it's me, it's Joseph. And then he lets them know, like, he says, and now do not be distressed and angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been a famine in the land. So he's talking about that. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. It also seems similar to some of the studies I was doing on the book of Zechariah about how Cyrus was called to help the stage of the remnant that came out of Babylon many generations later. And it's similar that there was contention among the tribes. It just developed in this certain template, and then this similar type of fracturing seemed to occur within Solomon's kingdom, and just similar foreshadowing going on there. And it seems similar to Cyrus being situated to then help them to deliver them from captivity, and then develop the temple, by which then some atonement would then, through the later stage of Jesus, be developed through the temple. Joseph goes on and says in 45:8, so then it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me, you, your children and grandchildren, your flocks and your herds and all you have. I will provide for you there, because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise you and your household and all who belong to you will become destitute. You can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that it is really I who am speaking to you. Tell my father about all of the honor accorded me in Egypt, and about everything you had seen, and bring my father down here quickly. Then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept, and Benjamin embraced him, weeping, and he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. Afterward his brothers talked with him. When the news reached Pharaoh's palace that Joseph's brothers had come, Pharaoh and all his officials were pleased. Pharaoh said to Joseph, tell your brothers, do this, load your animals and return to the land of Canaan. Bring your father and your family back to me, and I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you can enjoy the fat of the land. You are also directed to tell them, do this, take some carts from Egypt for your children and your wives, and get your father and come. Never mind about your belongings, because the best of Egypt will be yours. So the sons of Israel did this. Joseph gave them carts, as Pharaoh had commanded, and he also gave them provisions for their journey. To each of them he gave new clothing, but to Benjamin he gave 300 shekels of silver and 5 sets of clothes. And this is what he sent to his father: 10 donkeys loaded with the best of Egypt, and then 10 female donkeys loaded with grain and bread and provisions for his journey. Then he sent his brothers away, and as they were leaving he said to them, don't quarrel on the way. So they went up out of Egypt and came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan. He told him, Joseph is still alive. In fact, he is the ruler of all Egypt. Jacob was stunned, and he did not believe them. But when they told him everything Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts Joseph had sent to carry him back, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. And Israel said, I am convinced my son Joseph is still alive, and I will go and I will see him before I die. It really is such a redemptive story here that really foreshadows some of the symbolism, as I was saying, that's carried through when Israel divides, and then there's a redemption, and then through the stage of Jesus with redemption and whatnot. Seems to be portrayed a little bit in the symbolism later when they talk about Jesus and how they don't always recognize him or understand some of the different mechanisms by which are functioning here in a type of redemptive narrative. Israel set out with all that was his, and when he reached Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. And God spoke to Israel in a vision at night and said, Jacob, Jacob. Here I am, he replied. I am God, the God of your father. He said, do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. and I will go down to Egypt with you, and I will surely bring you back again, and Joseph's own hand will close your eyes." Then Jacob left Beersheba, and Israel's sons took their father Jacob and their children and their wives in the carts that Pharaoh had sent to transport him. They also took with them their livestock and possessions they had acquired in Canaan. Jacob and all his offspring went to Egypt, and he took with him to Egypt his sons and grandsons and his daughters and granddaughters, on all his offspring. Then to the names of the sons of Jacob and the descendants who went to Egypt. I'll skip forward that list of the genealogy and descendants and whatnot, and says, "Now Jacob sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph to get directions to Goshen. When they arrived in the region of Goshen, Joseph had his chariot made ready and went to Goshen to meet his father Israel. As soon as Joseph appeared before him, he threw his arms around his father and wept for a long time. Israel said to Joseph, 'Now I am ready to die, since I have seen for myself that you are still alive.' Then Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, 'I will go up and speak to Pharaoh, and will say to him, My brothers and my father's household, who are living in the land of Canaan, have come to me. The men are shepherds, they tend livestock, and they have brought along their flocks and herds and everything they own. When Pharaoh calls you in and asks, What is your occupation? You should answer, Your servants have tended livestock from our boyhood on, just as our fathers did. Then you will be allowed to settle in the region of Goshen, for all shepherds are detestable to Egyptians.' Joseph went and told Pharaoh, 'My father and brothers, with their flocks and herds and everything they own, have come from the land of Canaan and are now in Goshen.' What also seems interesting here in that Joseph is saying this is because he's being shown distinct from the Hebrews, right? But he's developed a spiritual connection within Egypt. And so when he says this here, he's helping his family strategize to live in Goshen, because it says, 'Then you will be allowed to settle in the region of Goshen, for all shepherds are detestable to Egyptians.' This also sounds like a connotation to what we find in the previous story of Cain and Abel, where it says, Genesis chapter 4, the children of Adam and Eve. Adam lay with his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. And let's skip forward. Now Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. And there's a lot that can be supposed about the story of Cain and Abel, but basically it kind of divides some of those that keep the flocks and then those that work the soil. And then eventually you see the development with different ones that come from those different lineages. But you also find that it says to Cain, so what you also find is there's this contention between the rural shepherds and then like those that develop into certain types of not just nations but like kingdoms. It says to Cain, 'Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must master it.' So this is the story where this contention between kingdoms and some of these other like whether it be the shepherds or the rural flocks, or possibly later what he is making reference to as the shepherds and whatnot. It says that Cain should master it. He's saying there's this contention there. You're having contention against your brothers. Why are you downcast? The wrong decision is knocking at your door, but you must master it. And so it supposes that, and what you find in the story is that Cain, just the wrong decision overcomes him and he kills his brother, and there's this contention between these types of development. But what it also seems to accompany is this notion that Cain could have otherwise mastered it. So what is it to master it? And so it almost seems to be portraying the story that Joseph is saying, now that he's in the side of the rulers, there's the rulers and the shepherds in some sense. He's saying, he was first in that position, similar to Cain, but this is a portrayal where Joseph basically masters it, and he weaves into the connection, arbitration or mediation between these worlds. And so he allows certain forms of connection and redemption to occur between these worlds. And so he says, then you will be allowed to settle in the region of Goshen, for all shepherds are detestable to Egyptians. So he's mediating between the Egyptians and the shepherds, and he masters it. He could have killed it. You know, it almost comes across as like he wants that. He has this, like, not that he wants to do away with them in the same sense, but what does he ultimately want? He wants truth. He says he wants there to be truth and honesty, because their deception has set before him a lot of hardship and trauma, and basically a death sentence on his life, and perpetuated in a lot of unresolved suspension of distrust among everyone involved. But then he just wants truth. He wants them to stop compiling deception after deception. So he's confronted with his trauma, and he masters it. He spiritually masters it. And he enters into what God calls him to do. Similar to like Cain. Was Cain supposed to master it? You know, like God comes to Cain and says, sin is knocking at your door. You must master it. This division, this hostility. And so he enters into this like truth campaign. And then he tells them, basically, it's not as though he just offers forgiveness, like, okay, I'm here in this situation and my life turned out for the better, I forgive you. Because in that sense, it's not simply just forgiveness in the sense of like letting them go. You find in the story that there needs to be a corrective measure, because it's entangled deception around so many people. And it's affected him, it's affected the brothers that had done it, and it's affected the father and his perception of the events. And so it was just this unresolved animation. And so to master it seemed to involve confronting that to where the people have this conviction to speak truth and to make corrective measures. And then also it aligns with the way that the path of life is going. There's a call greater than the confusion among the people. The greater call is to align the nations, because death is knocking at the door of everybody. It's affected so many people, and they need to not only correct things internally with them, but they need to correct things on a larger scale for the sake of life going forward for the nations. And so it's just interesting how these things are correcting the previous stories as well within nations, kingdoms and whatnot. So then chapter 47, Joseph went and told Pharaoh, my father and brothers with their flocks and herds and everything they own have come from the land of Canaan and are now in Goshen. He chose 5 of his brothers and presented them before Pharaoh. Pharaoh asked the brothers, what is your occupation? Your servants are shepherds, they replied to Pharaoh, just as our fathers were. They also said to him, we have come to live here among because the famine is severe in Canaan, and your servants' flocks have no pasture. So now please let your servants settle in Goshen. Pharaoh said, this part also has a connotation to Zechariah when it's talking about various shepherds that that had become dishonest and need to be confronted with repentance and honesty. And so you find that also in Zechariah. Pharaoh said to Joseph, your father and your brothers have come to you, and the land of Egypt is before you. Settle your fathers and brothers in the best part of the land. Let them live in Goshen, and if you know of any among them with special ability, put them in charge of my own livestock. Then Joseph brought his father Jacob in and presented him before Pharaoh. After Jacob blessed Pharaoh, Pharaoh asked him, how old are you? And Jacob said to Pharaoh, the years of my pilgrimage are 130. My years have been few and difficult, and they do not equal the years of the pilgrimage of my fathers. Then Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from his presence. So Joseph settled his father and his brothers in Egypt and gave them property in the best part of the land, the district of Ramses, as Pharaoh directed. Joseph also provided his father and his brothers and all the father's household with food according to the number of their children. There was no food, however, in the whole region because the famine was severe. Both Egypt and Canaan wasted away because of the famine. Joseph collected all of the money that was to be found in Egypt and Canaan in payment for the grain they were buying, and he brought it to Pharaoh's palace. When the money of the people of Egypt and Canaan were gone, all Egypt came to Joseph and said, give us food. Why should we die before your eyes? Our money is used up. Then bring your livestock, said Joseph. I will sell you food in exchange for your livestock. since your money is gone." So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and he gave them food in exchange for their horses, their sheep and goats, their cattle and donkeys, and he brought them through that year with food in exchange for all their livestock. When that year was over, they came to him the following year and said, "We cannot hide from our Lord the fact that since our money is gone and our livestock belongs to you, there's nothing left for our Lord except our bodies and our land. Why should we perish before your eyes, we and our land as well? Buy us and our land in exchange for food, and with our land will be in bondage to Pharaoh. Give us seed so that we may live and not die, and that the land may not become desolate." So Joseph bought up all the land in Egypt for Pharaoh. The Egyptians, one and all, sold their fields because the famine was too severe for them. The land became Pharaoh's, and Joseph reduced the people to servitude from one end of Egypt to another. However, he did not buy the land of the priests because they received a regular allotment from Pharaoh and had food enough from the allotment Pharaoh gave them. That is why they did not sell their land. Joseph said to the people, "Now that I have bought you and your land today for Pharaoh, here is seed for you so you can plant the ground. But when the crop comes in, give a fifth of it to Pharaoh. The other 4/5 you may keep as seed for the fields and as food for yourselves and your household and your children. You have saved our lives," they said. "May we find favor in the eyes of our Lord. We'll be in bondage to Pharaoh." So Joseph established it as a law concerning land in Egypt, still in force today, that a fifth of the produce belonged to Pharaoh. It was only the land of the priests that did not become Pharaoh's. Now the Israelites settled in Egypt in the region of Goshen. They acquired property there and were fruitful and increased greatly in number. So this also seems to be a portion of, if we're looking at this as a template for the end times, or the culminating of Jesus putting in check some of these things, or, like resolving some of it. It also seems like, so there's a land allotments, and then there's where they go into Egypt, which eventually is likened to when they go into Babylon. And while they're in Babylon and likened to this portion when they go into Egypt, they seem to absorb into this template at this time of Egypt, where among the rulers of the world, and this whole effort to remedy issues between rulers and the nations, the rural nations and the outskirts, the shepherds and whatnot, they eventually then seem to have their land inheritances absorbed into Egypt or absorbed into Babylon. And then what they find, though, at the stage of Egypt is, they say the only thing that they have is their bodies and their land. And so they keep their bodies, but they sell their land and their livestock. And it says, but in the rest of Egypt, so everything was sold into Egypt in that sense, right? And then it says, then the people were then, because of this, like, reduced to a type of servitude. And we then find along these lines is this template of the rulers, servitude, and like people simply having their bodies. And then the only other free part out from Egypt is the priests that did not belong to Pharaoh. Here then, to return to that, says, however, so everyone was reduced to servitude. However, he did not buy the land of the priests because they received a regular allotment from Pharaoh and had food enough from the allotment. So they weren't put into a place where they had to sell their land. Pharaoh gave them that is why they did not sell the land. Joseph said to the people, now, so basically all of the land was sold to Pharaoh, except the priests because they weren't put in a place where they had to sell their land for food. Joseph said to the people, now that I have bought you in your land today for Pharaoh, there is seed for you so you can plant the ground. But when the crop comes in, give a fifth of it to Pharaoh. The other 4/5, skip forward. You have saved our lives, they said. May we find favor in the eyes of our Lord. So this is also why this kind of foreshadows Jesus. So they're talking about being saved, right? You have saved our lives, they said. We may find favor in the eyes of the Lord. We will be in bondage to Pharaoh. So Joseph established it as a law concerning land in Egypt, still in force today, that a fifth of the produce belongs to Pharaoh, and it was only the land of the priests that did not become Pharaoh's. Now the Israelites settled in Egypt in the region of Goshen. They acquired property there and were fruitful and increased greatly in number. So it's also interesting there because later what happens is a lot of the land allotments are absorbed into Babylon as well. And the only thing that seems to survive as distinct is the connection of the temple. So there's the world dominion and then the temple. And then it's through the temple that the remaining lineage of Jesus through Judah then is claimed into the dominion of God. It's like this whole symbolism. About their days, and then it's the time where Jacob is about to pass away. It says, if I had found favor in your eyes, put your hand under my thigh and promise that you will show me kindness and faithfulness. Do not bury me in Egypt, but when I rest with my fathers, carry me out of Egypt and bury me where they are buried. I will do as you say, he said. I swear to me, he said. Then Joseph swore to him, and Israel worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff. Sometime later, Joseph was told, your father is ill, and so he took his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, along with him. When Jacob was told, your son Joseph has come to you, Israel rallied his strength and sat up on his bed. Jacob said to Joseph, God Almighty appeared to me in the land of Canaan, and there he blessed me and said to me, I am going to make you fruitful and increase in number. I will make you a community of people, and I will give this land as an everlasting possession to your descendants after you. Now then, your 2 sons born to you in Egypt before I come to you here will be reckoned as mine. Ephraim and Manasseh will be mine, just as Reuben and Simeon are mine. Any children born to you after them will be yours in the territory they inherit. They will be reckoned under the names of their brothers. As I was returning from Paddan to my sorrow, Rachel died in the land of Canaan while we were still on the way, a little distance from Ephrath. So I buried her there beside the road to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. When Israel saw the sons of Joseph, he asked, Who are these? They are the sons God has given me here, Joseph said to his father. Then Israel said, Bring them to me so I may bless them. Now Israel's eyes were failing because of his old age. He could hardly see, so Joseph brought his sons close to him, and his father kissed them and embraced them. Israel said to Joseph, I never expected to see your face again, and now God has allowed me to see your children too. And then Joseph removed them from Israel's knees and bowed down with his face to the ground. And Joseph took both of them, Ephraim on his right toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh on his left towards Israel's right hand, and brought them close to him. But Israel reached out his hand and put it on Ephraim's head, though he was the younger, and crossing his arms, he put his left hand on Manasseh's head, even though Manasseh was the firstborn. Then he blessed Joseph and said, May the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has delivered me from all harm, may he bless these boys, may they be called by my name and the names of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and may they increase greatly upon the earth. When Joseph saw his father placing his right hand on Ephraim's head, he was displeased, so he took hold of his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. And Joseph said to him, No, my father, this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head. But his father refused and said, I know, my son, I know. He too will become a people, and he too will become great. Nevertheless, his younger brother will be greater than he, and his descendants will become a group of nations. He blessed them that day and said, In your name will Israel pronounce this blessing. May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh. So he put Ephraim ahead of Manasseh. Then Israel said to Joseph, I am about to die, but God will be with you and take you back to your land of your fathers, and to you As one who is over your brothers, I give the ridge of land I took from Amorites with my sword and my bow. Jacob called his sons and said, gather around so I can tell you what will happen to you in the days to come. Assemble and listen, sons of Jacob. Listen to your father Israel. Reuben, and then this is where chapter 49, he goes in, gives his words to the sons. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, the first sign of my strength, excelling in honor, excelling in power. Turbulent as the waters, you will no longer excel, for you went up into your father's bed, onto my couch, and defiled it. Simeon and Levi are brothers, their swords are weapons of violence. Let me not enter their council, let me not join their assembly, for they have killed men in their anger, and hamstrung oxen as they pleased. Cursed be their anger so fierce, and their fury so cruel. I will scatter them in Jacob and disperse them in Israel. Judah, your brothers will praise you. Your hand will be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's son will bow down to you. You are a lion's club, O Judah. You return from the prey, my son. Like a lion he crouches and lies down, like a lioness who dares to rouse him. The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he comes to whom it belongs, and the obedience of the nations is his. He will tether his donkey to a vine, his colt to the choicest branch. He will wash his garments in wine, and his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes will be darker than wine, and his teeth whiter than milk. In Zebulun, you will live by the seashore and become a haven for ships. His border will extend towards Sidon. Issachar is a raw-boned donkey lying down between two saddlebags. When he sees how good is his resting place and how pleasant is his hand, he will bend his shoulder to the burden and submit to forced labor. And Dan will provide justice for his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan will be a serpent by the roadside, a viper along the path that bites the horse's heels so that its rider tumbles backwards. I look to your deliverance, O Lord. And Gad will be attacked by a band of raiders, and he will attack them at their heels. Asher's food will be rich, and he will provide delicacies fit for a king. Naphtali is a doe set free that bears beautiful fawns. And then Joseph. Joseph is a fruitful vine near a spring, whose branches climb over a wall. With bitterness archers attacked him. They shot at him with hostility, but his bow remained steady. His strong arms stayed limber. Because of the hand of the mighty one of Jacob, because the shepherd, the rock of Israel, because your father's God who helps you, because of the Almighty who blesses you with blessings of the heavens above, blessings of the deep that lies below, blessings in the breast and the womb. Your father's blessings are greater than the blessings of the ancient mountains, than the bounty of the age-old hills. Let all these rest on the head of Joseph, on the brow of the prince among his brothers. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he devours the prey, and in the evening he divides the plunder. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what their father said to them when he blessed them, giving each the blessing appropriate to him. Then he gave them these instructions. I am about to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave in the field of Ephraim the Hittite, the cave in the field of Machpelah near Mamre in Canaan, which Abraham bought as a burial place from Ephraim the Hittite. Along the field, there Abraham and his wife Sarah were buried. There Isaac and his wife Rebekah were buried, and there I buried Leah. The field and the cave in it were bought from the Hittites. Then Jacob had finished giving instruction to his sons and drew his feet up into the bed, breathed his last, and was gathered to his people. Joseph threw himself upon his father and wept over him and kissed him. Then Joseph directed the physicians in this service to embalm his father Israel. So the physicians embalmed him, taking a full 40 days, for that was the time required for embalming, and the Egyptians mourned for him 70 days. When the days of mourning had passed, Joseph said to Pharaoh's court, if I had found favor in your eyes, speak to Pharaoh for me. Tell him, my father made me swear an oath and said, I am about to die. Bury me in the tomb I dug for myself and in the land of Canaan. Now let me go up and bury my father. Then I will return. Pharaoh said, go up and bury your father, as he had made you swear to do. So Joseph went up to bury his father. All Pharaoh's officials accompanied him, the dignitaries of his court and the dignitaries of Egypt. He goes on to explain that Joseph is then allowed to bury his father and go through the process of burying him in Canaan. And it also seems to kind of awaken various ones in that region where they're noticing, they're saying, When they reached the threshing floor of Atad near the Jordan, so there was lamenting going on because they were observing this mourning. The Canaanites who lived there saw the mourning. So it just seems interesting there. And then they're saying the Egyptians are holding a solemn ceremony of mourning. So you start really finding this like meshing together of like the of Egypt and Canaan and this whole surrounding region through Joseph. So then he passes away, and then the brothers, so after the father passes away, the brothers saw that their father was dead. They said, "What if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs that we did?" And so they sent word to Joseph saying, "Your father left instructions before he died. This is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and the wrongs they committed." So it's just kind of interesting that at this point, even with all that has been said and done, there's still, some of them are still kind of scheming. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins. So they're adding to the lineage of the father these certain claims. So it kind of shows that they haven't really had, like some of them haven't really had this transformation internally. They're still just looking at surrounding conditions and they're not really living spiritually. They're still trying to play the chords of the father, even to the point where they're manufacturing certain ideas and beliefs in reference to the father so that they can try to ensure some type, like tap into certain honorary loyalty instead of actually just having a change of heart. This is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers and the sins and the wrongs committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the sins of the servants of God of your father. When their message came to him, Joseph wept. And so, maybe there was still some unresolved stuff going on there. But they could have just asked for forgiveness, because then it says, his brothers then came and threw themselves down before him, and we are your slaves, they said. But Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children, and be reassured. And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. And Joseph stayed in Egypt. So you kind of wonder, because they know that he was loyal to his father, and so he wants to honor his father, and so they appeal to that. But they could have just been more honest about it and said, we ask for your forgiveness in honor to our father, and we will live with you as your slaves, or something to that effect. They just continued to cloak these approaches in like further manufacturing of deception to some degree. So then Joseph tells them not to be afraid, and he'll provide for them. Joseph stayed in Egypt along with all his father's family. He lived 110 years and saw the third generation of Ephraim's children. Also the children of Machir, son of Manasseh, were placed at birth on Joseph's knees. Then Joseph said to his brothers, I'm about to die, but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Joseph made the sons of Israel swear an oath and said, God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up from this place. So Joseph died at the age of 110, and after they embalmed him, he was placed in a coffin in Egypt. So then that's the end, and then the next story is in the book of Genesis and introduces generations later with the story of Moses. That was a long story, and that was even the short version where I wasn't going to go into the little side trails. There's a lot to study there. But I do find it interesting that eventually what remains in reference to a land inheritance through the stage of Egypt and whatnot is the priests. And that seems to also be what eventually is like a remnant through Judah in connection to the priesthood. Eventually the last remnant of land is through Judah, and the next appeal for the return of the surrounding nations is through the temple. Find then later though is the inheritance through the next stage of the template of temples and lineages is the inheritance of the temple workers is through the tribe of Levi, and their inheritance is God. And there's just all these connotations that eventually culminate in it being absorbed into this larger transformative work on the world stage, and then the access to the temple does eventually return to what remains is our temple being our bodies of worship, and our inheritance being in the kingdom and dominion of God and out of this world, and just all these other connotations. So just a lot of things to apply there, but it also just kind of portrays the stage of Joseph eventually being relieved in this like spiritual alignment with God on the world stage with the various nations and whatnot. And then the stage of the confrontation of various ones, having those corrective measures and kind of being relinquished into this stage that Joseph testifies to. And so if you do try to apply it to the culmination of things, you realize like through Jesus enacting that stage of reconciling and mediating between the worlds of the kingdoms and the rulers and the spiritual calling, and not only reconciling some of those stages, but bringing it into a proper alignment and corrective measure, and creating a path mapping out corrective measures so that it not only heals those that are guilty of certain betrayals or what have you, but helps other people to have a mapping of corrective measures so that there's not these entanglements that are skewing the attempts of success for the nations and whatnot. But also relieve some of the requirements that eventually it's fulfilled in this spiritual freedom, right? So Jesus talks about that, like no longer required to go through Jerusalem and the temple and whatnot, or to worship God through that manner, but free within our bodies to worship in the dominion of God, and then still working out, relieving the entanglements of the like nation kingdoms and whatnot. Anyway, so a lot of things to think about there. I think I'll leave it at that. And it was just kind of an interesting topic to be reminded of today, and especially as you see patterns like this perpetuated at different stages throughout the scriptural story.